and welcome to my channel. July literally just started. It's only the 5th, but I feel like it's so late for me to be filming this video already. But today we are going to be doing our monthly reading wrap up for June, and I'm actually pretty excited because I've got my stack of books next to me and I read some really good books this month. June was a very good reading month for me. And per usual, before we get into the books, let's go ahead and kind of like quickly go over what we did this month. So we started off the month going to the bookstore. My main purpose for going to the bookstore was because I got a gift card from a friend for my birthday, but then we also went to a local like used bookstore. And it was just a really fun little book shopping day. And then we did our monthly TBR jar video, which this was the second time I did it. I just uploaded my third one for this month and they're always so freaking fun. And then the most exciting thing that I did for myself personally last month was I finally put up my bookshelves and organized them. I freaking love these bookshelves. I'm so obsessed. And then the 21st of June rolled around and that was the official first day of summer. So I did a summer reading recommendations video, which was basically like half book recommendations, half like my personal summer TBR. It was full of fluffy romances, thrillers, and some poetry books. And then we wrapped up the month with a Lynn Painter 24 hours of reading challenge, which definitely went in a different direction than I thought I was going to, but I had a lot of fun regardless. So that's what I did in June. Now let's get into our stack of books that we read. I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 books to talk about. So let's get started. The first 2 books that I have to talk about are Thunderhead and The Toll, which are book 2 and 3 in the Scythe series. Technically, I read these at the end of May, but I forgot to talk about them in my May wrap up. So we're talking about them now. That being said, it has been like a month since I've read these, and I'm gonna be honest, that's too long ago, and I don't really remember a whole lot. I did rate the series as a whole as a 5-star read. I did really enjoy it. The first and second book in the series I gave 5 stars to. This one got a 3.5, purely for the fact that it was just really slow. The Thunderhead left off on a pretty big cliffhanger and I was so anxious to find out what happened. And this book just took so long to get to it, literally hundreds of pages before it finally addressed what this book left off with. And that was torture. It still took a while after that for it to like really get rolling, but I will say once it did, so good. The very end of the book is very action-packed, and as much as it was like agonizingly slow in the beginning, I do feel like you needed all that information for the end to like be worth it, I guess. So overall, this series I gave a 5 stars to. I highly recommend. It was so good. All right, and then next up we have 2 different books from the Wicked Villains series. I only have one with me because I checked these out from the library, and the first one I actually read in the beginning of the month, and then this one I read kind of near the end, but because they're part of the same series, we're going to talk about them together. Basically, this is a series that is inspired by Disney movies, and they are super smutty books. I think I've talked about one of these books in every single reading wrap-up since I started this channel, so if you want to know my thoughts on the rest of these books, just kind of like check those out, I guess. I'll leave them linked down below. But for this reading wrap-up, we did finally finish the series, and I finished it off with The Beast, which is technically the 4th book in the series, and then Queen Takes Rose, which is the last book in the series. I have absolutely no notes written down for The Beast, so we're gonna try our best to just wing it. I did give it a star rating of 3.5 stars, so I definitely liked it. This one was basically about Beast, Gaston, which his name is a little bit different. It's like Gaeton or something like that, like the S is missing basically. And then Isabel was the female character's name. This was actually one of my more favorite ones, so maybe it was like a 4-star. I don't know. But anyway, basically the general plot of this one is Isabel had previous relationships with both Beast and Gaeton at the same time when they were kind of like younger, or a few years before this book kind of starts. And they were both aware of it, but kind of jealousy got in the way and they all broke it off kind of a thing. And the way that The Beast kind of starts off is Gaeton basically propositions the Beast and Isabel to kind of do what they did before, but for the purposes, I think, for Isabel to like finally pick one of them, because both of the men love Isabel and want to be with her, but she just can't like choose between them basically. So Gaeton kind of like throws out, why don't we all just like date, see what happens, and at the end of it you can pick between us kind of a thing. There's always some kind of like extra little thing that's going on in the background, like a subplot, and honestly I don't really remember what it was for the beast. But overall, I really enjoyed the book. Now let's go ahead and talk about Queen Takes Rose. This one is about Aurora and Malone, who is another female. So this one is a relationship between two women. Aurora works for the underworld and Malone is a patron of the underworld, which is an adult club that's owned by Hades. These books overall have kind of like a mafia type vibe where they all live in Carver City, but there's different like leaders of certain areas within Carver City, and usually within each book, one of the people in the relationship is one of the leaders. And in this one, Malone is kind of one of the more feared ones. I don't want to give too much of the story away, especially because this one was kind of like the more dynamic of all the books. But basically, Aurora and Malone have history, not in a relationship or sexual tension kind of way, but like in a something tragic happened and they hate each other essentially, or at least Aurora hates Malone. And they always just kind of like keep their distance from each other until Aurora's like contract with the underworld is almost over and Malone hires her for the last 2 weeks to be her own personal, like, her spicy partner for 2 weeks. And basically Aurora wants to get her revenge on Malone for what happened in the past, so she agrees to it, and things go from there, basically. Overall, I gave this one a 4-star rating. This is the highest rated one that I gave because I just really liked it. It's just so funny to me because when I first started reading the series, I was like, what is this? But now that it's like finally finished and I'm done and I have no more books to read, it actually made me kind of sad. Like I was halfway through this book being like, I don't want it to end because then it'll all be over. So are the plots like crazy dynamic with a lot going on? Absolutely not. But do I now want to buy the entire series and reread them again at some later date? Yes. And then kind of keeping on the spicy train, we have The King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair, who is one of my new favorite authors. This was so good. So this is basically a spicy book about vampires, which I've never actually read any books about vampires before except for like Twilight. So actually, you know what? I did read a series that had vampires in it. It was like vampires and fairies. It was this series, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, like The Kingdom of Stars and Shadows, I think it was called. That series had vampires in it as well, like I said, but it wasn't like, it didn't really go into detail too much about like the vampire situation so much, but this one does. This one is all about vampires and it was so good. So this one is basically about Izolda. I don't know how to say that name. It's right here. Actually, let me look it up because I want to know how to say it.
Izolda.
Izolda. So Izolda, that's how I'm gonna pronounce it from now on because that's what Google told me. Anyway, so this is about Izolda and Adrian. Izolda is the daughter, so she's a princess of a king, and for the purposes of like not starting a war and for the safety of her people, she's being married off to Adrian, who is the vampire king. And she does kind of like go into it already feeling like attracted to him, but she's trying to kind of like fight that because he's supposed to be like the enemy and things like that, because he's basically taking over like all the kingdoms. So her people are like, why are you not killing him? And she's trying to like fight these feelings for him. I'm reading the back so I can like make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Faced with the possibility of becoming the thing she hates most, I already forgot how to say that name.
Izolda.
Izolda. Okay. Izolda seeks other ways to defy him and survive the violence and political mechanisms of Adrian's brutal vampire court. Except it isn't the court she ends up fearing the most, it's Adrian and her intense attraction to him. Wrapped in a mystery and a past he refuses to discuss, Adrian nevertheless starts to become less of a monster. Despite their undeniable chemistry, she can't help but wonder why the king, fierce, complicated, ambitious, and at times inexplicably tender, chose her as consort. The answer will shatter her world. I feel like I might need to reread this already, even though I literally just read it like 2 weeks ago. Sometimes I read books, I think, too fast. Like, I'm really into them, so I like can't put them down. But then after I'm done, I like don't remember any details. Next up, we have Heartless by Marissa Meyer. And I have such conflicting feelings about this book. This does say that it is a kind of like backstory on the Queen of Hearts, like why she is the way she is, which if you've seen Alice in Wonderland, we know she is a fiery, angry little queen. And I knew this was not going to end well, and it didn't. I literally finished this book, I think at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had to like grab another book to start just to get like the bad taste of this book out of my mouth before I went to sleep. But that is not to say that this was not a well-written book. This was such a good story. It was a little long-winded at times, but it was like such a good story. It had a ton of references to Alice in Wonderland. Literally, it takes place in wherever it is that Alice in Wonderland takes place. Wonderland, I guess. The way they talk is very much how they talked in Alice in Wonderland. You got to meet certain characters from the book, like the caterpillar, the Cheshire Cat, the White Rabbit had a couple of appearances. Also too, because it does take place in Wonderland, there was a lot of like just fun things that happened, or like little like mini adventures that they went on and stuff like that. It was a really fun book in that sense. And like I said, I did actually really enjoy it until the very end. I just was hopeful the entire time that it wasn't going to end the way that it did, and it did end that way, and it was sad. The next book that I have to talk about is The Love Wager by Lynn Painter, and this was a book that I featured in my Lynn Painter readathon video, but if you watched that video, you know I did not actually finish this book. They did get a little repetitive reading them back to back to back the way that I did. So I ended up feeling like I was doing the book a disservice if I like forced myself to read it for that video. So I do feel like the break that I took was definitely necessary, and I did literally take like a 2-day break. And I think it was the difference between me just thinking it was like an okay book to actually really liking the book. And I will say I do actually really like this book. That being said, if you're interested in what this book is about and kind of like more detailed thoughts on this book, because I did read quite a bit of it in that video, I'll leave that link down below. Go ahead and watch that video. But I just kind of wanted to talk about it really briefly in this one, just to kind of like update you guys, if you did see that one, that I did finish the book. I did end up really enjoying it, and per usual with Lynn Painter, her books are just so cute. They're very humorous. I find myself like smiling and giggling a lot while I read her books, and this was no exception to that. And then last but certainly not least, we have Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I loved this book so much more than I thought I was going to. Basically, this is about two coworkers that end up writing letters to each other and kind of forming a relationship via these letters. And the idea of that sounded really interesting to me because I've never heard of a romance novel doing that. But this book ended up being so much more than that for me. The male love interest in this book basically has social anxieties, and I did kind of know that going into this book, and that was actually one of my only hesitations with reading this. I do myself also have some social anxieties. I'm a very introverted person. New situations and new people make me very uncomfortable and nervous. But that being said, like for some reason that kind of representation in a book just seemed almost kind of cringy to me. I was really worried that it was going to be just like cheesy, but it ended up being so good, and I felt so seen. That was also a very new reading experience. I've never read a book where it focused so heavily on a character with social anxieties. It was just really nice to like relate to a character in that way. Also too, it did go, like I said, like way more in depth with it than I thought it was going to. I thought it was going to be, like I said, kind of cringy and just very like, just kind of thrown in there for the sake of being different, that kind of thing. Like that's what I was worried about, but it wasn't. I feel like the author took a lot of care to really represent anxieties and kind of like how it affects people, and I'm getting like giddy like thinking about it. Like it was really nice to kind of see the interactions between Jacob and Brianna and kind of like feel and be told kind of via the book that like just because you have these anxieties doesn't make you like broken or weird. You're just a person with a different set of needs and boundaries, and like that is totally okay. But then also obviously I did like the story itself. The note passing back and forth didn't last nearly as long as I thought it would, but it does kind of make sense that that's not something that could go on forever, especially because they are coworkers, they see each other every day. If anything, I would categorize this as like a fake dating kind of situation, which I absolutely loved. Like it kind of went from very briefly doing the letter thing that attracted me to the book to jumping into a fake dating situation, which was like the majority of the book, and I was here for it. It did get a little heavy. Brianna, the main character's brother, has cancer, but then also there are some past relationship triggers on the female character, Brianna's side, that kind of like come out to play near the end of the book, which definitely kind of made it more real, if you will. It kind of like took it beyond like your normal fluffy romance. That being said, as someone that does not like to read about heavy topics, I didn't mind it in this book. So those are my thoughts on Yours Truly. I freaking loved it. This is definitely a 5-star read for me. The sun has left the building and I actually loved it so much that I immediately ran to the library and picked up Part of Your World, also by Abby Jimenez. This is a book that literally everyone says that they love, but for some reason I just have never been interested in reading it. You can't really see because the sun is too bright, but but because I loved Yours Truly so much, I figured I would give it a shot. Also, I feel like I heard someone say that this book had some of the same characters as this one, so I felt like I needed to read it even more. This one is basically about Alexis and Daniel, who basically come from like completely different worlds. Alexis is very much the city girl. She's an ER doctor. She has a nice car, wears expensive things, lives in the city, like I said. And then Daniel, I don't remember what he does for work. I don't know if they've said. He basically lives in like a small town. He has like goats and a dog and has a kind of more of like a farm life type of a thing. So basically this is like a romance between two people that are very different. The very end of the synopsis says, bringing Daniel into her world is impossible, and yet she can't just give up the joy she's found with him either. With so many differences between them, how can Alexis possibly choose between her world and his? I have not finished it yet. I'm actually currently only on like page 40 something. Like I'm not very far into it at all. And I will say, I'm really liking it so far. If this one ends up going well, I think Abby Jimenez might become my new favorite fluffy romance writer. And with that, that is everything that I have for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I read a lot of good books for June. June was a really good reading month for me, and I have high hopes for July. I've got a lot of really fun things that I'm planning on reading. ACOTAR is kind of like the main thing, and then I want to get into some poetry books. Also, I've been buying books like crazy the past week or so a book haul is coming at some point during this month. Anyway, that's everything that I have for this video. I hope you guys have had the most amazing of days, and I will hopefully see you guys in my next one.